If you want to understand artificial intelligence, you need to use it in a deliberate manner. I'm sure you've heard about prompt engineering. This is the way you interface with a model to get to the desired answer. But what about the system prompts that guides the model to start with? In this video, I'm using Google NotebookLM to explore what a model can do for us. So let me get out of the way and get into NotebookLM right away. NotebookLM is an environment that allows you to add sources and work on these sources. In this video, I'm using 6 YouTube videos that represent MIT lectures on artificial intelligence. One thing to note is the YouTube videos need to have captions to work in NotebookLM. Without the captions, it cannot operate on the content. So if I look at the add source here, you have multiple ways to add sources. Either you can upload files of your choice, you can use Google Docs, Google Slides, you can use links to websites and links to YouTube, which is what I did here. And you can copy and paste your own text. Here I'm operating on the 6 YouTube videos. Right away it provides a summary of the content of the lectures. And the summary is pretty good. For example, here we see the sources explain how these networks can extract features from raw data, learn complex patterns, and make predictions or generate new content. So in general, this summary is pretty good. So that's a good way to start. Also within NotebookLM, you have Notebook Studio that provides predefined operations. The first one that we see here is study guide. So if we look at the content of a study guide, we can see that it provides 10 quiz questions. And when we look at the questions, for example, the first one, what are the 2 primary tasks the computer vision algorithms perform and how do their outputs differ? And you look at the answer provided, the 2 primary tasks are regression and classification. Regression outputs a continuous value while classification outputs a discrete class label. So the question is pretty decent in terms of what you may want to know within a study guide. However, the answer seems to be lacking in specificity, doesn't really tell you what regression is and what classification really is. So there's still work that can be done there, but it's a good start. In addition to the quiz, you have essay questions, examples of essay questions where you could elaborate on the content, and something pretty important, a glossary of key terms. In the glossary of key terms, let's scroll down and we can see, for example, that you have the definition of perceptron, a single neuron in a neural network performing a weighted sum of inputs followed by nonlinear activation. So the definition is pretty good, it's part of the content. It gives us ways to better understand the content. If I go next to the FAQ, which I think complements the study guide, we see once again a bunch of questions that are being asked. The first question here, what is the core idea behind computer vision and how do convolutional neural networks contribute to it? So these are pretty good questions, and again, that contributes to better understanding of the content. We can see here that NotebookLM is a great tool that allows us to better understand any material we want to learn about. Moving on, we look at the briefing document. And a briefing document goes through the lectures one by one and gives a certain summary of it. The summaries are pretty good, again, and if we look down, for example, in language models, we can see here in large language models that they are very large neural networks trained on massive data sets of text. They are trained to predict the next token, word or subword in a sequence. So right there, that gives us a good clue where large language models don't necessarily operate on words per se, they operate on tokens that may represent words or parts of words. The summary gives us the notes we need to be able to review the material. Finally, the third one is the timeline. The timeline really doesn't really apply to this type of environment. It basically says here's day 1 and here's the cast of characters. So depending on the type of material you have, the timeline may apply, but it doesn't really apply here in our context. The last section of the studio I want to point out is the ability to generate some sort of podcast of the content of the lectures. You can provide a prompt and it then will generate that podcast. Just to give you an idea of what it is, let me play the first 15 seconds.
All right, welcome back everyone for another Depth Dive. Today we're tackling artificial neural networks.
ANNs.
ANNs. And we really want to make sure like everyone gets what they are. Not just the buzzwords, but like the actual concept.
Yeah, for sure.
And
The prompt provided was what are ANNs, and you see that it generates a podcast that tries to be engaging. In my opinion, that's a little too much, considering that what are ANNs and provide an 11-minute podcast is not something I want to do. The first interaction I wanted to have with the document was to retrieve a statement that was made within these 6 hours, and I could not quite remember what the statement was. So basically, I simply typed this statement here. What's a statement starting with something like the world is not? And then I can simply ask, and then you see the answer provided here. It says the world is extremely nonlinear. This was the statement I was looking for, but like I said, I could not quite remember what it was. But despite the fact that I said, find me something like the world is not, it still found the statement that I wanted to find. And it gives me references, you see the little one here, of where it was found. So this provides quite a bit of information, but I could limit the content of the answer by simply adding to this in 30 words or less and see what happens then. And see now the statement is much shorter and I get exactly what I want. The world is extremely nonlinear. So this is very useful because if you have 6 hours of lectures, you want to be able to retrieve what you remember without having to re-listen to 6 hours of lectures. So the interaction with the documents is very useful. Another thing to note is, for example, if I ask, what is an object database? Then the answer I'm getting is, I am sorry, but the provided source do not contain any information about object databases, therefore I cannot provide a response to the query. So now we see that we're really limited to the content of our documents, which is excellent since that's what we want to study. But being limited to the content of the sources means that also that our answers are limited. For example, if I come back and say, what does it mean that the world is extremely nonlinear? Then I get an answer that says, the world is extremely nonlinear means that real-world data sets are often nonlinear. So it's kind of a circular definition that we get here, and it doesn't get to the final point of what does that mean to be nonlinear. I can be a little bit more specific and ask, what does nonlinear mean? And again, the type of answer I'm getting is, I get the statement that I was looking for, the world is extremely nonlinear, real-world data sets are often nonlinear, neural networks must be able to handle nonlinear data. So we don't get to the bottom of what nonlinear means. So there are limitations within NotebookLM. You're limited to what was provided in the lectures. You can interact with the content, but you cannot ask questions like if you had an instructor where you could ask, what does that mean to be nonlinear? And the instructor would provide an answer. So what did we learn by exploring what NotebookLM can do? For one thing that it was not demonstrated here is that over time, NotebookLM also changes. NotebookLM being a service means that it gets updated regularly. In previous tries, I saw that it had a tendency to provide long answers and also always try to be positive with the answer. So even with the question, what are object databases? It still said it could not give me an answer, but that provided a long text saying, here's what I can tell you about. And so we see the fact that it's a service, it will change from one time to another, and you will need to adapt to what NotebookLM can do. The other thing I want to make sure that you're aware of is since it's a service, the data is sent to Google, and Google can then use that information. So do not use any confidential information within NotebookLM. So overall, NotebookLM can be a great study help to allow you to learn subjects faster. You can learn about a specific product, download the documentation in NotebookLM, and start interacting with it to find your answers instead of spending so much time reading through the material to hope to find the answer you want. So NotebookLM is a great tool to use. There are more tools to explore, but we need to know more about what large language models can do and about neural networks. So please provide comments on this video and tell me how you're using artificial intelligence in your day-to-day lives, either at work or at play. And don't forget to subscribe. See you next time on Bite-Sized Data Science.